Hello, staff of Central Elementary School. Welcome to today's virtual professional development activity. We will be reviewing and discussing this webinar regarding special education, compensatory services, COVID-19, and beyond. Our presenters and contributors are Joy Davis, myself, your fourth grade counselor, Janae Diaz, your third grade counselor, and Marley Butler, the fifth grade counselor. On our agenda today, we will be discussing the increasing demand for special education services, compensatory education services in the COVID-19 era, distance learning for students with disabilities, and the future of public education. As we get started, we would like to talk about the increasing demand for special education services in America. This area has grown over the past 7 years. The enrollment of special needs students is currently at an all-time high and accounts for 14% of students in public schools. While the rates of students diagnosed on the autism spectrum continues to rise, the largest category of special education students have specific learning disabilities. Whether the continuing rise is due to more careful diagnosis or increasing childhood disabilities, no one quite knows. But what we do know is that a trend is clear and the demand for competent services continues to grow. The span from 2008 to 2018 saw a 140% increase in students with autism. Additionally, 56% more students identified with other health impairments and 29% of students with a developmental delay. Overall, there was a 5% increase in specific learning abilities, likely due to the changes in eligibility requirements. Although this number has risen slightly over the last 2 years, finally, there are 15% fewer students with an intellectual disability. Through this number has stabilized over the last 3 years. Which brings us to our next slide. For many schools and districts, increasing demand for special education services magnifies the challenge of a nationwide teacher shortage. In 2018, 46 states reported too few special education teachers, and that gap between supply and demand continues to grow. Educating students with special needs should be a top priority, yet critical shortages of special education teachers and support staffs exist in all regions of our country. The demand is increasing at a time when the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates the shortages are acute. These shortages, as well as unfunded positions, impede the ability of students with disability to reach their full potential and limits the work of districts to prepare all students to be college and career ready. Personnel shortages are a result of recruitment and working challenges met by new challenges due to COVID. These lead to excessive paperwork, unmanageable caseloads and workloads, inadequate support, and professional isolation. There is insufficient funding for incentive programs designed to entice new graduate students and support them, such as loan forgiveness programs and grants. There are also fewer qualified faculty in higher education and higher education costs. There is a limited supply of qualified professionals willing to work in communities such as rural, high poverty, and high crime areas. Finally, certification barriers in some states limit opportunities for specialization, relicensure, or alternate routes to certification. Now that we have discussed some of the challenges going on in the special needs world today, we will now discuss Compensatory education during COVID-19. Compensatory education services are educational services a child with a disability needs to make up for skills and learning loss because the service wasn't provided. That child also be referred to as a denial of FAPE. And below I have listed what FAPE is, the Free Appropriate Public Education Act, which deals with students with learning disabilities. Due to COVID-19, most special needs children have not received services required in their IEPs for 3 months and counting. One student's IEP called for 2 hours of daily one-on-one instruction, but online instruction only provided 1 hour and 15 minutes per week. In addition, they required hand-over-hand instruction from a teacher who would help them complete a task, and we know that intervention is impossible to replicate with online learning. Things to consider. School districts and directors of special education must ask some of the following questions regarding their staff practices, what they're doing for remote learning, and that would be, what is FAPE under these circumstances? Has our district offered FAPE during the pandemic, and what stakeholders? So here at Central Elementary School, it will be the IEP team's responsibility to decide whether the students need compensatory education in the wake of a school closure tied to the pandemic. So the IEP team includes the school counselors, the teacher, the speech language pathologist, and any other intervention team assigned to each individual IEP. Our staff will also need to consider feedback from parents. Regularly ask parents what they are observing about their child's behavior and learning at home. Collect data about what skills the parent is using, so you have data that would be similar to the data we would collect in school. This is going to be helpful, if anything, and help the students' progress move forward while at home. The second thing we must do is document parental responses. So once you have that information, you have to respond to that feedback. So if a parent tells you that their child isn't logging on when they're supposed to, a stakeholder within the IEP meeting team will need to find out why that is and respond to that. You may need to change the time that they are logging on or consider providing instruction in a different format that fits not working if whatever they're doing is not working. And finally, number 3 is promote patience. This will be more for the school counselors when they're reaching out to parents, especially students with more significant disabilities and those who require hands-on interventions may need to solicit parent engagement. Now I'm going to touch on what we've called pandemic penalties. So we know that school districts are facing many challenges, and one is a lack of expenditures. School closures have limited school districts' ability to spend. So maybe, we couldn't complete all our evaluations, or we weren't able to hire paraprofessionals to deliver one-on-one services to students during the part of the school year while school was closed. That, coupled with the lack of revenue, I think we are expecting drops in state and local revenue due to the downturn of the economy which was caused by this pandemic. So there won't be enough revenue to meet the spending obligations, and furthermore, budget cuts could shut schools down ability to provide FAPE to students. If the district fails to meet that, the state could demand reimbursement. And I predict that there is not a director out there right now that thinks they need less money, especially with special education. We definitely need to prepare, and we need a lot more money in our budget. So what we can do as teachers and other staff is know our expenditures, share your concerns with administrators, and just estimate expenses for compensatory services. Next, we will discuss how to support students with disabilities as they return to school, whether it's following Plan A or B. We will have students coming in at some point. We aren't sure when. Right now, it's looking like the district has voted on September 8th. So here are some ways we can advocate for students as they're returning to school. Students with disabilities will find it difficult to adapt to some of the changes that I have listed on the screen. So we need to recognize extra challenges distance learning has posed for our children and take this into account as schools reopen. First, it's very important that we make children feel safe and in control as we emerge from this pandemic and focus on the safety, health, and welfare of our students, staff members, and everyone in our community. We must make sure we follow CDC and state guidelines even during the summer as we're planning for ESY and reopening. Second, we need to help students reconnect with each other, their teachers, and rebuild relationships. We also must focus on our own mental health as well as our students. We must document services instructions and progress during closure and reconvene the IEP team when school reopens to determine whether any changes to the IEP are needed or compensatory services are owed. We also must provide FAPE to all students. Lastly, I have a short remote learning simulation, which is just a model of how one teacher has designed her classroom for students to access at home. This is important for administrators, counselors, and teachers to all be aware with this process so we know how to help our students. Okay, so there we have discussed